Welcome to Getting Started with GDPR Compliance. I'm Linda Thielova, Global DPO at OneTrust, and today I'm going to give you an introduction to the GDPR, its scope, fundamental principles for processing of personal data, and the legal basis for which to legally do so. Let's start with an overview of what the GDPR actually is. The General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR, is a law adopted by the European Union that sets strict rules for the processing of personal data and aims to protect EU citizens' fundamental right to privacy. The GDPR is made up of 11 chapters that outline these rules, and it covers data subject rights, data transfer mechanisms, and enforcement, among other things. Now let's focus on the scope of the GDPR. The GDPR covers your processing activities regardless of whether they're performed automatically or manually. For example, that customer newsletter that you send out every month, that would be covered. Or if you're jotting down employee performance notes and then store them in a filing cabinet, that is also covered. It also applies to all organizations which are operating within the EU. However, it also applies to organizations based outside of the European Union, as long as they process personal data of EU citizens. Finally, it applies to businesses that monitor behavior which is taking place within the EU. There are 7 fundamental principles for the processing of personal data that organizations must abide by. These are, first, lawfulness, fairness, and transparency. You must process personal data in a fair and lawful way, and you must be transparent about how you do it. Second, purpose limitation. Process personal data only for the purpose for which you have originally collected it. Third, data minimization. You should limit the amount of personal data you collect to what is reasonable and proportionate for the purpose. 4. Accuracy. Always make sure that the personal data you keep is accurate and up to date. 5. Storage limitation. Only keep the personal data for as long as you need it to fulfill your purpose. 6. Integrity and confidentiality. Make sure that the data is safe and that you limit unauthorized access to it. 7. Accountability. You must be able to demonstrate that your privacy program complies with the GDPR's processing principles. Data controllers must be able to demonstrate that a lawful basis exists for processing of personal data and that the processing is necessary and proportionate to the purposes for which the data was collected. Under the GDPR, there are 6 legal bases that can be relied on. The first one is consent. The individual can give explicit permission for the processing of their data to take place. The consent must be obtained in a clear and unambiguous manner. Consent is, however, only one of the legal bases and is not always the best one to rely on, so always consider which legal basis is the best fit for the processing. Second is contract. Processing of personal data can be lawful when it is necessary for the performance of a contract with the individual. Third is legal obligation. This is where personal data must be processed in order for the data controller to comply with their own legal obligations. The fourth are vital interests. If the vital interests of the individual are at risk, personal data can be processed. For example, if the individual's in a life-threatening situation and they're unable to give consent with their medical data to be processed. Fifth is public task. Lawful processing can take place to complete a task carried out in a public interest. The sixth are legitimate interests. This legal basis can be used when the data controller has a legitimate interest in the processing activity, which overrides the rights and freedoms of the data subject. However, you need to always conduct a balancing test to balance out the individual's rights with your legitimate interest as a controller. The GDPR is a regulation which sets strict rules for the processing of personal data and fundamental rights of EU citizens. Organizations which are covered by the GDPR must comply with the 7 principles of processing personal data, and they must ensure that they have a lawful basis for doing so. By following the GDPR's rules, businesses can respect the rights of individuals and protect their privacy. Follow this series to learn more about the GDPR and how you can get started with compliance.